Hi guys, how old are you? I'd love to see the age range of our viewers. Write your age below.
You ever stand in a room full of your own blood, your people, the ones who are supposed to know the shape of your laugh, the way your hands fidget when you're anxious, the childhood stories that made you who you are, and feel like you're just background noise? I did, for years. At every Thanksgiving dinner where they passed me the rolls without eye contact. Every Christmas where I brought gifts no one remembered to open. I was the question mark in the family photo, cropped out, edited over, forgotten. But nothing, not even the decades of subtle rejection, compared to the gut punch of finding out my brother got married last weekend. And nobody told me, not even a damn text. It happened the way things always seem to in this era, accidentally and publicly. I was minding my business on a slow Monday morning, sipping cold coffee and finishing some contract edits when my phone buzzed. Facebook notification. Tagged in a photo by my cousin Shelley, who I hadn't seen in 6 years. I clicked out of habit, and there it was, a sun-drenched, perfectly curated shot of my mother and father beaming in a line of people outside the brick church I grew up in. Everyone in navy and blush tones. Flowers, matching ties. Caption, such a beautiful day to celebrate love. Welcome to the family, Amy. I stared at it for a long minute, like it was written in another language, before my brain connected the dots. Amy, my brother's girlfriend. I'd met her once, twice maybe. He was married. They were married. The whole damn family knew, the whole damn town knew, and no one had thought to include me, not even the courtesy of an invite I'd probably have declined. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't smash my phone, like maybe a part of me wanted to. I just sat there, staring until the screen dimmed and my reflection stared back at me. I looked calm, neutral, like a woman who'd just watched the final nail go into the coffin of a relationship she'd been mourning since the day she left home. It took me 15 minutes to work up the nerve to call my mother. I shouldn't have. I knew better, but something inside me needed to hear her say it. To hear her voice try to explain why I was the only sibling not there, why my name didn't even make the wedding program. She picked up on the second ring. Hello? Her voice was too chipper, like she already knew what the call was about and didn't care. Hey, Mom, I saw the pictures. There was a pause on her end, not even a second long, but enough for me to catch the breath she took. The inhale that screamed, oh no, without a word. Michael got married? Yes, he did, she said, like she was confirming the weather or that the mail had arrived. It was a beautiful ceremony. I waited. She didn't fill the silence. You didn't think to invite me? And here it came, the moment. The sentence that would calcify in my chest forever. Well, we just didn't think you'd want to come. That's what she said. Calm, polite, practiced. Like the words had been prepared for this exact confrontation. I sat there blinking, stunned by how casually cruel someone could be while sounding sweet. You didn't think I'd want to come to my brother's wedding? I asked, my voice too steady, even to my own ears. There were a lot of logistics, Jenna, and you've been so distant. We weren't sure if it'd be comfortable for you. And there it was, the real message behind the words. We stopped waiting for you to care. We stopped pretending you were part of this. I didn't fight, didn't defend myself, didn't tell her about the 100 messages I'd sent that went unanswered, or the Christmases I'd flown home for only to spend alone in a hotel. Because no one had room. I just said, got it, and hung up. I smiled after that, nodded to myself even. I'm sure if someone had walked into the room, they would have thought I was perfectly fine. But something inside me had flipped. A switch I didn't know was still waiting for permission to click. 3 days later, I was on a plane back to my hometown, a place I hadn't been in nearly 5 years. I didn't call ahead, didn't book a nice hotel, just picked the first rental car I could find and started driving through the streets that still knew my name, even if the people didn't. I wasn't going for closure. I wasn't going to confront anyone. I was going for something else entirely. It happened as I passed St. Bartholomew's, our family church for 3 generations, the same building where they'd hosted the wedding I'd been scrubbed from. Across the street, a billboard loomed over the parking lot. Empty, white, waiting for a message. And suddenly, I knew exactly what mine was going to be. Have you ever been left out by the people who were supposed to love you the most? Cut from the family narrative like you were a shameful chapter in a book they wish they never wrote? What would you do if you had one chance to make them look up and see you again? Not the version they rejected, but the real one? Would you walk away quietly, or would you make damn sure they'd remember what they'd tried to erase? Because I chose the second one. And trust me, I was just getting started. There's a particular silence that only comes when you walk through the streets of a town that used to know you, a town that once held your secrets and watched you bleed and grow and break and rebuild, and yet now looks through you as if you were never anything more than a stranger who took a wrong turn. I felt that silence press into my ribs as I drove down Oakview Lane, the same stretch of cracked asphalt that used to carry school buses and marching bands and kids on bikes with streamers flapping in the wind, now empty, ghost-like, almost resentful. It hadn't changed much. Same storefronts, faded but proud. Same diner with the God Bless Our Troops sign half lit in the window. Same old church with its white steeple cutting the sky like a dagger. But I had changed. Or maybe I'd simply become the version of myself I was never allowed to be while living under that roof, under that gaze, under that judgment. I pulled into the gravel lot behind the Garden Court Motel, the kind of place with peeling paint on the doors and vending machines that ate your quarters without apology, the kind of place you stay when you don't plan on seeing anyone, or when the people you once called family now treat you like a question they'd rather not answer. The front desk clerk didn't ask my name. I liked that. Anonymity was a comfort here. I paid in cash, declined the continental breakfast, and headed straight to my room. A single bed, dusty curtains, the kind of floral bedspread that looks like it's trying to remind you of a home that never existed. It was perfect. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind was too loud, too crowded with old echoes, the kind of memories that sneak up on you in motel rooms, quiet, inconvenient truths that whisper you back into the body of a little girl who just wanted someone to tell her she mattered. I remembered the way my mother used to hold my hand in church, but only when people were looking, the way my father sat stiffly in the pew, silent, eyes always forward, his attention more loyal to Scripture than to the daughter who was slowly disappearing into herself. My brother, Michael, he was always the star, the obedient one, the boy who carried the weight of their expectations without flinching. He was everything I wasn't. Agreeable, devout, predictable. I loved him once, deeply and without resentment, but that love had eroded over time, chipped away by 1,000 tiny exclusions, a million quiet reminders that he was the chosen one, and I was the cautionary tale. The next morning, I drove. No destination, just motion. I needed to see the church again, not for some melodramatic confrontation, not because I thought anyone would notice me standing across the street like some bitter specter, but because I wanted to see the place where they'd decided my absence was more convenient than my presence. It stood tall and white, self-righteous in its perfection, surrounded by well-trimmed hedges and parking lines painted fresh. I pulled into the gas station across the road and bought a bottle of water I didn't need, just to have an excuse to linger. And that's when I saw it, the billboard. It was still blank, stretched above the main exit like a smug canvas waiting for something worth saying. That was where it would go, my message, my declaration, my silent scream. I didn't make the call right away. Instead, I sat in my car, parked beside the pump, watching the church as the mid-morning sun lit its windows and cast long shadows across the lawn. I could almost see them, my family, filing in with their performative smiles, their tight Sunday clothes, their chatter about potlucks and youth retreats, and who was bringing the potato salad this year. None of them thinking about me. None of them wondering if I'd seen the pictures or cried in my overpriced apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and view of the city I'd fought tooth and nail to make mine. None of them remembering that I once sat in those pews too, terrified of hell, desperate for approval, begging God for a mother who looked at me like she wanted me, not just tolerated me. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was everything. Every skipped birthday, every holiday invitation that never came, every time they talked about me in the past tense, like I had died or disappeared or disgraced them just by becoming something they couldn't mold. I wasn't mad that I hadn't been invited. I was mad that it didn't surprise me. That afternoon, I found a local media office 2 towns over that handled regional advertising. The woman behind the desk had red hair and a voice like gravel. She asked what I wanted to say, and I told her to give me a few days. I'd know when I saw it. For now, I just needed to reserve the space. I gave her the exact location, across from the church, facing the exit. She nodded without judgment. I appreciated that. Later that night, while trying to fall asleep to the buzzing of a dying ceiling fan, I got a text. An unknown number, just one line. I saw your name on the motel registry. Thought it was a mistake. I stared at it, wondering who it could be. Another text followed. It's Becky from high school. Wanna get a drink? Becky, the girl who used to wear purity rings and pass out scripture bookmarks in the cafeteria. The girl who once told me my denim skirt was an invitation to sin. That Becky. Curious, I said yes. We met at a dive bar off Highway 19, a place with wood-paneled walls and neon signs that buzzed louder than the music. Becky looked older, obviously, but there was something else, something unguarded. Her hair was longer, her posture less rigid. She wore jeans and a faded hoodie. No cross necklace, no judgment in her eyes. You look exactly the same, she said as we clinked glasses. Except stronger. You look different, I replied. Yeah, well, divorce and bankruptcy will do that to a person, she said, smiling without bitterness. Turns out Jesus doesn't co-sign your credit cards. We laughed, and for the first time in days, it felt real. She asked about my life, and I told her the truth, or most of it. She nodded along, sipping her drink slowly. You were always the one they feared, she said after a pause. You didn't need them. That scared the hell out of people like your mom. People like me back then. I didn't have a response. Just sat there letting that truth settle in my chest like a warm stone. When we parted ways, Becky hugged me like she meant it. Whatever you're doing, she whispered, make it count. I didn't know if she meant the Billboard or something deeper, but it didn't matter, because I was finally being seen, even if it was by someone who used to look away. There's something uniquely suffocating about a Sunday morning in a town like mine, where everything from the smell of fresh-cut grass to the sound of distant bells feels choreographed to remind you that you don't belong, not anymore, maybe not ever. The streets were quiet, unnaturally so, as if every cough, every dog bark, every whisper had been paused to honor the ritual, that weekly charade where people dress in their finest discomfort and file into a building to pretend they're not slowly coming apart inside. I parked in the same gas station lot across from the church, just early enough to watch the parking spaces begin to fill with minivans and polished sedans. Just in time to catch the procession of familiar strangers climbing out with their Bibles, their clipboards, their eyes already scanning the lot for faces they hoped would notice them. I'd grown up among them, had sung in that same choir, recited those same verses with a shaky voice and a gut full of dread, wondering even back then if anyone in that building actually liked who I was, or if they just liked how good I was at pretending. But this Sunday was different. This Sunday wasn't about scripture or tradition or the polished lies that held this whole town together. This Sunday was mine. I leaned back in the seat of the rental car, sipping from a gas station coffee that tasted like burnt cardboard, and stared at the blank canvas that had, until this morning, stood silent above the church like some oversized gravestone for forgotten ideas. But now it was no longer empty. Now it bore the truth, my truth, wrapped in 10 words that would hit harder than any sermon they'd hear that day. Success looks different now, doesn't it? It was subtle, just sharp enough to sting without drawing blood. Just ambiguous enough to be interpreted a dozen different ways, but not by them. No, they'd know exactly who it was for. There wouldn't be any guessing, no questions. Just a cold, creeping recognition that the daughter they had so carefully written out of their narrative had somehow circled back to write her own. They started to arrive just after 9. My father's car, first, his old Buick, still meticulously waxed. He stepped out in his gray suit, the same one he'd worn to every graduation he wished I hadn't invited him to. His shoulders stiff and his eyes fixed on the ground, like he didn't want to acknowledge the billboard even though I could tell he saw it. Then came my mother, a full minute later, in a separate car, because apparently even married couples in this town maintained appearances above intimacy. She stepped out slowly, one hand clutching her oversized purse, the other shielding her eyes from the morning sun as she turned and froze. She saw it. There wasn't a dramatic gasp, no flustered clutching of pearls, but her body changed. The posture stiffened, her face tensed, that tightly controlled smile slipping for just a moment before she recovered. She stood there, staring, probably doing the mental math, probably wondering who else had seen it already, probably praying it could be taken down before the noon crowd hit brunch. I sat still, watching. My heart wasn't racing the way I thought it would. There was no adrenaline rush, no welling orchestra inside me, just a quiet, even calm, the kind that only comes when you've stopped needing something from the people who never knew how to give it. Cars kept pulling in, people pointed, a few laughed, some looked confused, but enough of them knew. And I could feel the shift in the air, like a storm that wasn't sure it was welcome. I didn't get out, didn't walk over. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about confrontation. This was about being unavoidable, about making them say my name out loud again. Not as a punchline, not as a footnote, but as a presence. By 10, I'd driven off. The billboard would stay for 30 days. That's what I paid for. I even negotiated for a second one, this one on the road that led straight to the family's favorite brunch spot. They'd have to drive under my words again, right after the benediction, while their stomachs growled and their facades cracked. Later that afternoon, as I sat back in my motel room with a lukewarm sandwich and a hollow sense of finality, my phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. Did you do this? No name, no context. But I didn't need one. It was my cousin Leah, probably the only one in the family who still followed me on Instagram, who still liked the occasional photo when I posted something from a conference or a beach that made me look like I was winning. She wasn't asking because she didn't know. She was asking because it was easier than saying what she really meant. Are you okay? I didn't answer, not yet. Instead, I opened my laptop and pulled up the saved drafts folder. In it were letters I'd written over the years. Letters to my mother, to my brother, to the church elders, even to God. Letters I never sent because I knew they wouldn't be read. Or worse, they'd be read and misunderstood. And then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened a blank page. I started writing, not to them, but to myself. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't asking to be understood. I was demanding to be seen. It's a strange sort of power, the silence that follows after you've dropped a stone into water and the ripples finally start to reach the edges, especially when those ripples take the form of group chats exploding with thinly veiled fury. Private messages typed out in cold-blooded righteousness, and relatives scrambling to make sure their fragile version of history doesn't get too badly bruised in the process. The first sign of the aftershock came on Monday morning, barely 24 hours after the billboard went up, when I opened my phone and saw a wall of red. Notifications that pulsed like warning lights, texts, missed calls, Instagram comments from people I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. It didn't take long to guess what they were about, and even less time to realize that I didn't care to read them. I deleted the entire conversation thread with my cousin Leah before even opening it, because I knew what would be in there. A string of passive-aggressive questions dressed up as concern, maybe a half-hearted, "we just didn't know how to reach you," and definitely at least one reference to how disappointed my mother was. It was later that day, while sipping a stale motel coffee and staring at my inbox, that I realized I'd been removed from the family group chat. Not by accident, not because they were trying to keep the peace, but because the narrative had shifted. and I'd become too inconvenient to keep around. There's a coldness in that moment that no heater can warm, a vacuum that opens in your chest when you realize your own bloodline considers you bad press, too much of a liability to even argue with directly. It's easier for them to uninvite, unfollow, unblock the channels through which your voice might reach them, because as long as they can keep you out of sight, they don't have to wrestle with the idea that you might actually have a point. The next few days passed in a blur of quiet defiance. I walked through town like a ghost still tethered to the places she once haunted, past the coffee shop where I'd worked my first job, past the library steps where I'd read poetry aloud to a group of kids who all moved away before the year ended, past the old theater that still had the same flickering marquee that never quite lit the whole way. No one said anything to me directly, but I saw the way people looked. Double takes that turned into careful stares, glances exchanged between old church ladies who tried to act as if they hadn't seen the billboard and yet couldn't look away. I'd become, once again, a story whispered behind paper-thin walls, the headline in a town that thrived on keeping things quiet. But not everyone was quiet. Becky called again on Wednesday, her voice breathless with a kind of conspiratorial glee that made me laugh despite myself. She'd heard the gossip. Apparently, someone at the Sunday brunch told the pastor's wife that Jenna's back and she's here to make trouble, which somehow made me sound a lot more dramatic than I actually was. Becky thought it was hilarious. She said, "You've done more to shake this town in one billboard than I did in 20 years of marriage." I met her that night at the bar again. Same stool, same cheap wine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was sitting across from someone who didn't need me to shrink to fit their expectations. She wasn't trying to save me, judge me, or fix me. She was just there, raw and unpolished, willing to listen without interruption. We talked about everything and nothing, her divorce, my company, the way women like us were always expected to smile through being ignored, to carry the weight of everyone else's comfort, even as our own backs cracked. She said something that stuck with me, her voice low and honest in a way that made it clear she wasn't trying to impress me. "They'll say you're bitter, they'll say you're acting out, but what I see is a woman who got tired of being erased and finally decided to take the pen back." That hit deeper than she probably knew. The next morning, I received the only message that made me pause. It was from a number I hadn't seen in years. One that hadn't reached out for birthdays or congratulations or holidays. It was from my father. The message was short, stripped of any pretense, just 5 words. "You made your point. Come home." I read it over and over again. Not because I was moved, but because I was stunned by the audacity of it. Come home, as if I had ever truly been welcome there in the first place. As if the decades of emotional exile could be mended by a single reluctant olive branch offered not in apology, but in quiet command. It wasn't an invitation. It was a truce, a weak attempt to control the narrative again, to sweep it all back under the rug and return to the unspoken agreement that we don't talk about the hurt. We just keep dressing it in Sunday clothes and smiling for the neighbors. I didn't respond right away. I sat with it, letting the words roll around my mind, trying to decide if there was any part of me still desperate for that illusion of belonging. I thought about the holidays spent alone in cities far from home, the birthdays where the only cards I got were from coworkers or friends who had chosen me instead of inherited me. I thought about the voicemail from 3 years ago, when my mother called me by accident and left a message complaining about Jenna and her selfish lifestyle. And I thought about the silence that followed every time I tried to reach out, every time I left the door open and watched no one come through. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I was remembering everything with clarity so sharp it felt like heat behind my eyes. The moments of being overlooked, the smiles that didn't reach their eyes, the times they prayed for me instead of listening. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. I wasn't even sad. I was something else entirely. I was free. The next morning, I packed my things, not to leave just yet, but to prepare. Because if they wanted me to come home, they were going to have to meet me where I was now, not where they left me. And I had one more stop to make before I answered that message. Because some stories don't end with forgiveness. Some just finally begin with the truth. There's a certain stillness that settles over a place after the storm has passed. Not the kind of storm that rattles windows or floods basements, but the kind that drags old truths out from where they've been buried for years. The kind that makes people lower their voices and walk a little faster past certain parts of town, hoping the echo of what's been said won't stick to their shoes. It was that kind of stillness I felt as I drove down the road that led back to my childhood home, the gravel crunching under the tires like bones snapping in the quiet. I hadn't been down that stretch of road in what felt like a lifetime, and the trees, older and heavier now, leaned in like witnesses ready to see what I would do, to see whether I'd finally ask the questions I'd kept swallowing or simply walk away without demanding anything more. The house looked exactly the same, as if no time had passed at all. Red brick, white trim, the same porch swing that had always creaked too loudly when the wind picked up. The same flower bed my mother kept obsessively tidy, though now the marigolds looked tired, like they too were trying to outgrow something. I parked on the street, didn't bother pulling into the driveway, maybe out of spite or maybe just out of muscle memory from years of knowing my space had always been conditional. When I knocked, I expected the hesitation, expected the long pause behind the door, the muffled conversation of someone deciding whether to pretend they weren't home. But the door opened quicker than I thought it would, and it wasn't my mother standing there, but my father, dressed in the same tired collared shirt I remembered from church days, his face lined deeper than before, his hair thinner, but his eyes just as unreadable. He didn't smile, didn't say my name, just stepped aside like he was holding the door open for a stranger selling vacuum cleaners. I walked in slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if I were dragging years of silence behind me like a shadow. The air inside hadn't changed, still smelled like lemon cleaner and something faintly burnt, the scent of a home that had tried too hard to stay neat, while everything under the surface rotted quietly. I sat down in the living room, the same beige couch, the same doily-covered armrests, and waited. "She's not here," my father said, as he poured himself a glass of water. "Prayer group. She doesn't know you're coming." I didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know if I was supposed to care. I just nodded once and waited again. He finally sat down across from me, resting the glass on the table with both hands like he needed something to hold on to. "I saw it," he said, and I didn't have to ask what he meant. "The sign." I stayed quiet. Let the weight of the moment do the work. "She's upset," he added. "Thinks you're trying to humiliate her." That made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because the idea that one sentence on a billboard could compare to a lifetime of cold shoulders and deliberate omissions was almost insulting in its absurdity. I leaned forward slightly, my voice low, steady. I wasn't trying to humiliate her. I was trying to exist. He looked down at the floor, and for a moment I saw it. The flicker of guilt, the crack in the stone. "We didn't know what to do with you," he said. "You were always so different. And she thought if we just gave you space, you'd come around eventually." I wanted to scream, wanted to throw every unreturned call, every ignored accomplishment, every time I'd tried to reach across the divide, and been met with silence back in his face. But I didn't, because I knew none of it would land the way it had landed in me. None of it would shift his narrative. So instead, I just stared. "You thought I'd outgrow being myself?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to draw blood. He didn't answer, just stood and walked to the hallway, where he opened a closet and pulled out a dusty shoebox, setting it down in front of me without a word. I hesitated before opening it, unsure whether it was some relic of sentiment or just another empty gesture. Inside were newspaper clippings, dozens of them, articles from tech journals, business features, even a piece from Forbes with my name bold in the headline, photos of me at conferences, printouts of company press releases, snapshots of my office ribbon cutting, all stacked neatly. I stared down at the proof of my life, evidence that somewhere, behind the cold exterior, someone had been watching. "She kept every one," he said, and this time his voice cracked just slightly. I didn't cry. I couldn't. because the box didn't erase what was done. It didn't heal the girl who had sat alone at graduation or the young woman who had waited 3 birthdays in a row for a phone call that never came. But it did something else. It proved that even in their rejection, they had never stopped looking. They had just never had the courage to let me know they were watching. I stood up without a word, leaving the box on the table, and walked out the door into the dusk light, the world around me muted, almost reverent in its quiet. I drove without thinking, instinct guiding me back to the church, back to the billboard that still loomed large against the sky, now stained amber by the setting sun. I parked beneath it and stepped out, looking up at the words that had caused so much disruption, so much whispered speculation, and I felt nothing, or maybe not nothing, but something quieter, deeper, a release maybe, or the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. They had seen it, all of them, and maybe that was enough, or maybe that was just the beginning.